Hello.
Hello. Should we get started? I think we have one agenda item.
Yeah, let's do it. Can we put the contents of the question in the meeting notes? Because the Slack history goes away, right?
Sure, I can add to it.
Thank you.
Martin, would you want to speak to your question?
Sure. So my question was surrounding. I was at KubeCon this year. There was a session I was asking. I think it was you. Not sure. Were you one of the speakers?
Oh yeah, I think you might have asked me this question.
Yeah, because I was essentially trying to reference this. This is just an example, but just like this data.yaml file within um um I guess my policy. However, the question I guess is during policy evaluation, it says that I can't import it, and so I'm wondering if I'm referencing the data rights, and it's referring to that data.yaml.
Oh, so sounds like you created a new lib folder and then put regos under there.
Yeah, so like I have like the supportive regos that I use within my source.rego. And then
yeah, I don't think that'll work with the constraint templates. I think it needs to be inside the lib section. And Max, please correct me if I'm wrong. So everything must be referenced in the constraint template.
yeah, so that's what I was wondering is if okay, so then if I put it in the constraint template within like the lib section, I should be able to reference it.
Somewhat. So it's I'm a little unclear as the specifics of what you're doing here. But there's I could speak to the mechanics of it. Then I have a couple of like larger questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So mechanically, what happens in a constraint template is you have the source, right? And that's just you want the actual like Rego string of the main entry point for your code in that
Mhm.
source field. And then there's a libs field that accepts an array of Rego source code strings, essentially. So yeah, one, it would need to be the literal Rego, and two, I don't think we currently support YAML directly.
Okay.
However, you can like write YAML as Rego, right? As a Rego data struct, and that could be a way of doing this.
Oh, okay. So then maybe that's what I need to do then.
Yeah, but so my other question would be like, what kind of stuff is in this data YAML?
Just like team names and stuff like that that we want to continuously update, maybe using some form of other automation that when if there's an existing change, it will automatically update the Rego and a constraint template. And I'm sort of using the constraint tool as well. I believe that was the one that was written by Plex System. So I was just trying to figure out some sort of way where we can keep track of, if I wanted to use some sort of other documentation as a check, essentially.
Right. Yeah. You want to like reference changeable data
Yeah.
in your policies.
Yeah.
So there's also, and I'm gonna like hunt for a link while I'm talking here, something called referential data, where you can point Gatekeeper to a third party object, right? Just that it should cache in RAM, and reference that object in the source code of your constraint.
Okay.
And then if you like kubectl update that object so it changes, that cache should update.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've never heard of that.
What was that?
I said I've never heard of that one.
Yes. Yeah. There are some operational considerations in the sense of Kubernetes is eventually consistent, right?
Mhm.
So if you
Yeah.
update the object, it won't like take place immediately. um, you can write your Rego defensively, right? So like an underdefined object is like overly restrictive in terms of policy, or just like rely on audit, right? Because audit will, if you're not relying on perfect enforcement of the webhook, it's less relevant. Um, but that also is kind of true of what you're doing here, right? Like if the contents of that file changes, that change is not going to be reflected until the constraint template gets updated by whatever system
Yeah.
you were going to use, right?
Quick question.
Replicating data, that's the section. So I found it. I'm going to put it in the meeting chat, and then I'll also put it in the meeting notes. So here it is in the chat. Yeah. Oh, Sarita, I just saw your question. Yes, external data.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So this is more data that would be referenced within our repository. Because we're keeping the policies within the same repository that all of our workloads are being deployed in.
Gotcha. You can use, at least with Gator, referential data, like that will still work. I don't know about, you mentioned some other project that you were using as well, though. I'm less familiar with that one. What was it again?
Other projects.
You had mentioned something authored by someone, some tooling that you were using.
Yeah, that was constraints. That is essentially
With a K.
yes, with the K. Sorry, I should have said that.
Oh, yeah, no worries. Oh, so that's for authoring, less for enforcement. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So and what are you using for the data stuff? Like I call it shift left enforcement, enforcing stuff in your repo. Are you using Gator or?
Yeah, so we were planning on using Gator within our CI and to test out the workloads and everything on their side, right? And then obviously we'll have Gatekeeper within the cluster. So
Gotcha. Okay, yeah. So external data should just work with Gator, like without a sync config of any kind.
okay.
If you're open to that idea.
And would that be for external data, would that be the HTTP send method?
Or sorry, I'm using external data. I'm referential data. I think Rita's trying to correct me because there's a different thing called external data.
Okay. I see what you're saying. Yeah, I gotcha.
But sorry, what was your question again?
No, I thought you were referring to the actual external data. I think there's like a provider or something like that you have to create, and it's an entire
Gotcha.
deployment.
Yeah. No, that wouldn't work. Shift left currently.
Yeah.
Sorry. Early morning, my nouns get tangled.
It's all good.
But yeah, referential data should work. All of what I'm talking about should apply for referential data.
Okay. Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. Did you have any questions about the mechanics of that, or is that are you happy?
I mean, I'm pretty happy with that. I think I just need to dig in deeper myself, and then if I have like any other questions, I'll just come back for you guys. Or
Gotcha.
the Slack channel. And like I don't want to take anybody else's time, but there was just questions around the post install and I think it was pre-install. And I saw the Helm chart on that and I was just confused, not sure what that was for. When you were installing Gatekeeper.
Yeah, I think probably Surtash or Rita is a better source. Like my understanding there, and correct me if I'm wrong, either of you two, is or anyone really, is that Helm does not deal with CRDs very well. Like it will install them initially, but if there's ever any changes, if you just use the default Helm mechanisms, it will not update those CRDs.
Okay.
And so the part of the pre and post install job, at least, is to maintain the ability to keep those fresh.
Oh, got it.
Yeah, that's why we created the Gatekeeper CRDs image. So if you see that in the Helm chart, that's basically updates the Helm chart. So it's CRDs.
Okay.
Yeah, and then like Max mentioned, Helm doesn't manage the lifecycle of the CRDs.
Yeah. All right, thank
so
you.
We have to come up with some sort of mechanism to do this on top of Helm, which we use the hooks for.
Okay.
Did you have a specific question or just general, like, hey, how
Yeah,
does this work?
I was just trying to, I was curious because I wasn't sure. Because
Yeah.
we're essentially trying to create some sort of tooling where we are running Helm template, but then it just grabs all of the files via, with all of the configuration from the values.yaml. And I was just trying to figure out what exactly was that and if I should be concerned and all that stuff. And so, yeah, that answered my question.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Did any other questions?
Hey, can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Yeah.
If you were speaking before, I could not.
Okay, sorry. I think I'm having some issues with my mic.
You are very low volume though, Rita.
Low even now?
Yeah. Is
You're like
anybody?
half of everyone else.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, no worries. Anyway, I'm just pasting this link in case this might help Martin. This was something that was brought up in another issue, and I just realized it's not that easy to find in our docs for how to sharing functions and adding like data, to your point, like static data, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was the libs
Yeah,
data. That was the
what you were talking about.
well, the starting point of like what Martin was considering, and then referential is an alternative to that. With the libs thing, the data would need to be in Rego form, but otherwise should work.
Gotcha.
The other thing I will say though about the libs solution is if you have if this is a large data set and you have many constraint templates that are using it, right, it will be copied per constraint template, so there will be excess RAM usage.
Oh, yeah. I didn't think about that one.
Yeah, it may or may not be an issue. The RAM usage could also come from and I don't know the extent to which things do this, so this is like by no means like this will happen. This is just no, this is a potentiality. Rego does like do optimizations, right? Like it tries to index, I think, particularly Rego codes. So if it, and probably the file would need to be pretty large before this is a concern, but you could also look at whether that leads to like a compilation delay or excess footprint.
Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely keep that in mind.
On the other hand, the sync stuff, because you sync by GVK, like it's not too hard. You could create like a sort of dummy CRD to give you a special kind to only sync that data. But if you try to use something like config maps, because so many people use config maps, they become rather large. Right? Or they use them, and they use them to store rather large chunks of data. Syncing config maps can sync in a lot more data than you intend. So creating a custom kind is a way around that.
Okay.
That's moot if you're using Gator, obviously, but if you're also running this on the cluster.
Yeah.
Cool. Anything else on this topic before we move on to the next one?
Nothing further from me.
Thank you for your questions. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your help. I really do appreciate it as well.
Absolutely.
Is this Jay for the
Yeah,
enforcement actions?
yeah. I wanted to discuss open questions and what needs to happen in this design doc to consider it complete, and like what are the gaps for me to assess what should my focus be to have it completed. So yeah, that's what I had in mind for this one. Yeah, so there are currently 4 open questions. Let's go through one by one. Let me just share the screen. Uh, can you guys see?
Yeah, can see it.
The first one was that, like, what happens when enforcement action is defined? How do we translate it? And if it is not defined, do we create one of those for backward compatibility?
Sorry, I'm just reading through. How does this relate to enforcement action? Do we need to force only one of these to be defined? Right. Yeah, that's. I mean, did you look through the backwards compatibility uh, doc that Kubernetes has in its design guidelines?
A little bit.
Because that should have a pretty detailed recipe here. But yeah, also, sorry, it's been a while since I've looked at this doc, so it's I'm struggling to remember what this is and the current state of things.
Do we need more time to go through? Then we can like discuss it in the next meeting as well.
So you're very quiet.
Oh, sorry. I was asking if we need more time to like go through it once more and then we can bring it up on the next meeting if that's the case.
Yeah, having like a couple of days notice
Oh, yeah, sorry.
would definitely be helpful if the doc isn't already like fresh, right? If it's been more than, let's say, a month since we've looked at it, I tend to have forgotten half of the the detail of like what is this and blah blah blah. I will say though that definitely look over those design guidelines. Let me know if you have lost the link, because like 90% there's already an answer there that has been like tested for other designs. And we can try to go through the rest. I'll just let you know when for me personally, when I don't have enough information to like give you a solid answer.
I think I remember, and this is just recalling from previous meetings around this, around number 1, I think we said we should continue to support it, right? But convert it to the new enforcement actions resource. Was that right?
For sure, that's a hard requirement, right? Because we can't
Yeah.
like break backwards compatibility, but there's like some nuance there, I think, around, you know, what do you do if both of them are defined, and what happens like if you only have the list defined in order to maintain backwards compatibility with like older clients that don't recognize the list, depopulate the first entry, other weird stuff like that. The literal CRD resource, I think, faced this issue when it changed from, I forget if it was like schema to schemas or whatever the change was, where it went from like a single schema to multiple schemas that are associated with different versions. There's probably been other examples though. No,
Yeah,
September.
we discussed these before. They're in the September 27 notes.
Kitten. Oh. All right, my cat is walking on my keyboard. Trying to look through these real quickly. Default star enforce. Yeah, so it's we talked some about the default value for sure, right? Because the defaults, if the user doesn't specify anything, should maintain the same behavior that we had before. The notes aren't detailed enough to give me any idea of how we were thinking about this edge case, though. Of what to do if both fields were defined, like should that be allowed, that kind of thing. Anyway, can we table the backwards compatibility one until we like have time to prep for it? Because that one will have like a lot of nuance.
Yeah, post one on that. I'm reading the K8s policy just to see what we can learn from that.
Yeah, there should be a section that is like directly on point here. So it may be like once we have the time to read that, the answer is just obvious. Do we want to move to number 2?
Sounds good to me.
I'm curious for number 2 what the alternatives would be.
Jay, are you speaking? I wasn't sure.
Yeah, you're on mute if you are speaking.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think I have any alternatives, but I was curious, like, why this was listed as open question. Do we have, if anyone recalls, what was the reason behind having this here?
Sorry, you're very quiet. It makes it hard to.
Oh, sorry. How about now?
A little bit louder, but not much. Like if you can like be slow and enunciate that may also help if you can't get any louder.
Let me change my microphone.
Okay.
How about now?
Say a little more.
How about now? I'm so sorry about this.
Oh yeah, that's much clearer. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I had given it some thought yesterday, and like I couldn't come up with any other alternatives for enforcement point to uh be identified. So like I guess there is no other way. If anything comes to mind, please.
Yeah, I tend to think not. Like we could play around with more structured strings, right? If we had some kind of like grand idea for how enforcement points might relate, think like a URI or a URL kind of stuff where you can, have prefixes, suffixes, or whatever to like classify various styles of enforcement points, right? Like, is this an admission style enforcement point like webhook or VAP? Is this audit? Is this Gator? But it's also just not obvious to me that that level of structure will be incredibly useful. One thing that I do get from that, though, is probably we want the schema to be flexible enough that if it winds up being useful in the future, there's room to add things like that. So yeah, it's a good thought for how to think about the schema of the resources. And the reason I say that is because of the backwards compatibility requirements, right? Instead of Yagni, right, the you ain't gonna need it principle, you kind of want to assume you'll need anything that you or at least room to add a thing that seems in any way likely you may want, because otherwise you may put yourself in a position where you just cannot add it in the future without breaking a lot of people. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the answer seems to be if we are all right with using strings, like with as opposed to structured strings.
Yeah, I think so. Like in looking at the schema, enforcement points is just a member of enforcement actions, and so there's nothing that prevents us from creating a sibling field here with fancier semantics if it's ever needed. So I'm somewhat comfortable that we're not painting ourselves into a corner by choosing string matching.
Yeah, yeah, that uh yeah. So the third one was, does it make sense to are we good for two? Anybody else have any thoughts? I'll take it as no. So the third one was, does it make sense to move excluded namespaces into under enforcement action? And I'm assuming no, because it's like part of match criteria, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons why not here from my perspective. One is if we think about constraints in more abstractly, uh, they are designed to be pluggable, right? So that a constraint isn't highly coupled with Kubernetes. So right now, if you look at the constraint framework code, the target handler defines the schema for the match criteria, right? And so when you have a constraint template and we hydrate that into a constraint, we take that schema from the target handler and create the match criteria, right? And so there's these very definite points where we plug in this like hyper specific set of data, um, and so it's almost like a object inheritance kind of model in that sense. This would complicate that, so I would need a pretty compelling reason to to blur that, and probably a story for handling the case where it is blurred. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yep. Let me just think about it a little bit more. Sync up with Sandra also. If we had any thoughts on this, and then
Sorry, you're now you're dropping out. I'm losing
sorry,
like every other
sorry.
syllable.
Yeah, I was saying, let me just give it a little bit more of thought to see I come up with an alternative story and sync with Xander also about why this question was here initially, and if we had already a use case for it, then we can discuss pro and cons and then decide whether or not it's worth all those efforts, right?
So I didn't get much of that, but let me try to summarize it. Let me know if I'm wrong. You're saying you kind of forgotten why this question was added, but you want to think about it, see if there are alternatives, discuss pros and cons related to that. Is that roughly what you
Yeah,
said?
yeah, right. Because like you said, there is already a specific mechanism implemented for match criteria, and uh like it be not sensible to for us to modify it without having a compelling reason for it. So I don't recall the initial reason that was already there for us to have this under open question. So, yeah,
Got it. Yeah, I mean, it feels to me like the reason for this would have been to customize different enforcement
yeah,
actions depending on the namespace. But you could also just do that with the match criteria and two constraints, right?
yeah, yeah,
Um, and then that whole two constraints notion that does then start to brush up against. I don't know if we all remember this issue. It was filed probably a month ago. Unfortunately, I've not followed up since the last time I followed up on it, where this guy had this design for multiple multiple constraints, basically, or multiple match criteria. That would kind of have like a priority evaluation to them, right? The first one to match wins. Does anyone remember that bug?
I don't recall.
I'll look for a link, but uh, Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving. He's already gone, but I'll look for a link. But that would also speak directly to that use case in probably the same kind of way, right? It would make it more efficient to express, but wouldn't have the same amount of drawbacks in terms of like blurring the ability to have constraints be abstract to the systems they're constraining.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm gonna search for that issue while we continue, unless people had other thoughts.
Alrighty. Yeah, the fourth one was that do we want to update and migrate users to this new system if there are already constraints available with enforcement action in place in cluster, and when they upgrade or like go to the next gatekeeper one. I think no, if we have a good system for backward compatibility, I think we shouldn't be migrating and taking up that load of
Hey
implementing.
Jay, I think you're still not very clear. It's
Oh,
hard to.
let let me just switch my uh
I think this is a network issue at
can you
this point. Like it sounds like dropped packets to me.
oh how about now? Can you hear me? I switched the microphone to third one now.
Yeah, actually, yeah.
Better.
Yeah. Oh, so yeah, I was just iterating the fourth question about like, do we want to implement a logic or mechanism for users to migrate to this new system, or uh,
It should be a zero touch thing. Like a config that was valid before should be valid after.
yeah,
Like 4 is a pretty clear no from a Kubernetes design guidelines. Right, that users should not have to do anything. In other words, not that we're not gonna like design anything to help them. It's that what was valid before should be valid after.
And what, sorry, when you say, are we doing migration on behalf of the users, doesn't that mean no action on the user?
yeah. So
And it's
the
a yes,
question,
right? Yes, we do want to do the change for the user, right?
Yeah, well, it's okay. I think the problem here is that 4 is like not a yes or no. It's that 4 is moot. There should be no change.
Right. Sure.
okay, cool.
I mean, I'm just clarifying because the no is confusing to me.
Yeah. It sounds like no, we're not going to help. But
It's like no. I'm pretty sure we're doing the
Yeah.
migration for them.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, yes is also confusing. Like literally, the answer is moot. There is no migration. Like any kind of notion of migration, if that exists here, that is a problem with the design, and it needs to be changed.
Okay. So that means that the enforcement action failed cannot be deprecated ever, right?
Correct.
Okay, cool.
So yeah,
Yeah,
so
I
it's
think
not about migration. It's like, I guess it's coexist, right? Making that kind of relates to number one, I guess.
yeah. Yeah, I think those were the open questions, and once we have a look at this doc, we can maybe next time discuss what else what else is needed for this design doc to consider it completed and then start on implementation. And yeah, sorry, one last thing. Max, I think you had this question which I didn't quite get. Like it says, what if someone wanted to write something like deny everywhere except K8s admission? So is the question, what if someone wanted to deny other enforcement points and not webhook, or the question is like deny everywhere except a namespace?
I'm basically pointing out excluded enforcement points. Like
Oh,
the original doc had that, this didn't. And
yeah.
so I was wondering about that use case, whether this doc covered it, whether we wanted to cover it, because excluded enforcement points was specifically for that use case.
Yeah. So I think the idea was to, if there is an enforcement point is missing from the fields, it is excluded, right? So does that,
works unless you have a glob.
yeah. Okay.
So sounds like that's not supported, right? I think that's
Y-
the
Yeah,
conclusion.
yeah.
Do we want it to be supported in the first iteration or no?
Will it make it more complicated? I think so, right?
Like in terms of code or for users, or what's the execution?
Code execution.
Execution complexity, not really. Code also shouldn't be too bad, right? You basically are adding a second if statement. The extra API surface complexity, I mean, it doesn't strike me as that much more complex. It is.
Variance.
I
What's
mean,
up?
do we have this use case, the Kubernetes, except Kubernetes admission?
I'm struggling to remember. I feel like we did. Like it's also the case that like adding this could be added after the fact, and it's not gonna it's not going to, you know, be a major change unless we have some real weird code architecture. Which
Are we talking about the like Terraform, that sort of stuff here?
yeah, well, so any enforcement point, right? I think there are people who basically you know, wanted a constraint to not be, say, enforced in audit, right? I think that issue did exist at one point. Probably it would make sense to have that in the webhook too. Like you could imagine if you had a very expensive to evaluate constraint that used a lot of referential data, or maybe a very slow external data query, you wouldn't want that in the webhook because of timeout issues. So that's the kind of use case that I think about when I'm like, maybe we do want it off the bat, but as I said, it could be added later.
Do you think it's more of an issue if we have a lot of enforcement points?
No, it's unrelated to that. I think like so the reason to use glob would be, and I think honestly most people would use glob because they just like, yeah, enforce it everywhere, right? I don't care. I want my policy enforced. But then they may have a strong opinion about except for this enforcement point, right? Because again, I think there's been 1 or 2 instances where people have
Sure. I guess I'm asking, right, I guess I'm asking is the opposite of a that is user can list out the enforcement points they want this action on, right?
Yeah, and the drawback there is then the user needs to care if they change how their constraints are enforced. Like say they weren't using Gator, but then decided to use Gator down the line, and they didn't account for Gator in the first place. They would need to update all their configs. So I do like the idea of allowing a certain amount of decoupling of policy from the exact enforcement infrastructure.
So,
But yeah, you go ahead.
so what's your what would the user experience look like? Like, do we need something, another field to indicate exclusion?
Yeah, yeah, it would just be a second sibling field here saying excluded enforcement points. It was in the original design doc that this was created from.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and that's why I say it could be added later, is because it's a sibling field adding a new field. There's no real concerns about is that possible or backwards compatibility or that kind of stuff. But it does mean that those use cases aren't covered, which were, I forget if they were specifically listed as motivations in the previous design doc, but that use case I think was discussed and did stick in my mind.
Yeah, I think it might have been like all except audit or something.
Yeah, the issue probably is still open somewhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was, I'm pretty sure audit. I remember that because audit struck me as a weird one. I would have thought that webhook would have been the more likely one for
So
people to want to exclude. There you go.
yes, so I think the original issue was that somebody wanted to turn off audit for a particular namespace. I think.
A particular constraint. That other one.
Oh yeah, sorry. Particular constraint. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's my recollection as well.
Okay, so sounds like we can add this field right now or later. So any strong opinion on right now versus like circling back after we implement this design and add it later?
Not really for me personally. I just wanted us to know what, be conscious about the decision.
Okay.
Anyone else?
If it's not too complicated to implement, I think it would be good to add it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, complexity wise, I wouldn't expect this to add more than a couple hours of work, if that.
Yeah, in the last call, we did say exclusion is not in first iteration. Just that way.
We said what?
Exclusion
Yeah.
is not in the first iteration.
Is not, okay.
It's not, yeah, we did talk about this.
Oh, we did?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Okay,
exclusion
cool.
not in first iteration. Yeah, interesting.
Is it, you're just looking through the meeting notes? Is that, or is there
Yep, 27.
That's how do you find, are you string searching or are you just like reading back until you
No,
find
I just searched for enforcement actions.
Gotcha.
I remember we talked about this. I think many of these things we already talked about.
Yeah, 100%. The backwards compatibility one we definitely did.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I think I'm good for now. I have a
Just to
couple-
close it on this one, are we doing in the first iteration or not doing in the first iteration? Because this is we are revisiting the decision.
Flip a coin.
I'm okay to just keep on the first iteration, and yeah, if we can come back to it later.
Yeah, I think the answer here though is to explicitly like call it out either way. Like obviously if we're gonna do it, it should be in the design schema here. If we're not gonna do it, just put it in the doc somewhere so we don't have this question asked again, because I will forget and will re-ask. Right. And also so we know that we have a marker like, yes, we've considered it. Here's why we can wait until later, so that, you know, if someone has some like thought that completely changes the design, we can make sure that that particular use case is still accommodated.
Okay, so the solution seems to be sticking with initial decision of excluding and then writing it somewhere to keep it noted that we already discussed this and these were the reasons.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
we'll add it to docs.
sorry, go ahead, Suresh.
I was just gonna say we'll add it to docs or something. Yeah, and then come back to it.
Yeah,
Okay.
you have a feature functionality section. Seems like a great
Yeah.
place for it.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I think I'm good for now. Yeah, we might need to visit this one or two more times before we can decide if it's complete or not. Mainly for backward compatibility reason, I guess. Yeah.
And then can you make sure to watch the previous one too? We might have other stuff in there.
Yeah.
So we cover all
Yeah,
the bases.
I'm gonna go through recordings of the previous ones as well.
I will say I'll be out until literally Wednesday of next week. So having time to go through it beforehand probably won't happen. If you were hoping to revisit the backwards compatibility thing by then. But honestly, the doc should answer most of your questions, the K8s design doc.
Okay.
Design guidelines doc.
Jay, if you don't mind, like if you discover anything from the recording, but it's not in the design doc, please add it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we're not gonna remember stuff, and the doc is all we have. So
Yeah.
And clearly, I will just like keep re-noticing things. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I think we're on time now.
Yeah, I think nothing from my side.
Cool. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah.